members joining us today. I always like to start with my little crash course about our organization and worldview. Humanist MN is a secular community for ethical living, committed to the well-being of all and sustainability of the planet, and a home for those looking for a community of naturally curious, compassionate, and rational people. In short, we believe that you can be good without a God. We are a very active organization, and we organize primarily through Meetup, so join us there to see our wide variety of upcoming events. We are currently an all-volunteer nonprofit, and we depend on the service and generosity of our members and friends to further our mission. If you are not already a dues-paying member, we encourage you to take that step, and you can do that and learn more about us on our website, humanistsmn.org. I am thrilled to share that we've officially rolled out our fundraising initiative for a part-time staff position for our organization. We're so grateful to have already received several generous donations. And if you'd like to learn more about this fundraiser, please grab a flyer on your way to the reception. They'll be handed out at the doors there. Or visit the table out in the lobby during the reception where you can get more information at that time. A little bit of housekeeping: restrooms are out the door and to the left, or downstairs and to the left. After the speaker and the Q&A session, we will have a reception in the lobby at 4:30. We would love for you to stay and socialize, and we'll be providing food and drinks, and we encourage you to please consider contributing with a donation to help us cover our costs. Also, a disclaimer that there will be photos and videos taken today that may be used for promotional and marketing purposes in the future. And up next is Karen Roll from HMN and FUS's mental health group.
Thank you, Ellie. I know announcement time is prime real estate, so I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Karen Rowell, and I coordinate the mental health team that includes members of both Humanist MN and First Unitarian Society. I've asked to come before you for two reasons: to promote and to recruit. First, I want to tell you about some great programs our team has developed. They're coming up soon. On November 2nd, we're hosting a Death Cafe where participants engage in open and authentic discussion about this taboo topic that death is. A week later, on November 9th, we have a workshop where you can learn about, complete, and have notarized your healthcare directives. Our plan to hold a Death Cafe was met with so much enthusiasm that November 2nd group is actually full, but I still wanted to tell you about it because we are collecting email addresses of people who would like to attend future Death Cafes, which we are willing and hoping to do in 2025. So go into our registration form and you can sign up to be on the mailing list for a Death Cafe. There's no registration limit on the healthcare directives workshop, so you can still sign up for that. And I have some signs at a table with QR codes to bring you to the registration form, so that'll be available in the reception. Next, we developed a workshop to explore what our Surgeon General has dubbed the loneliness epidemic. We will offer 2 in-person workshops on Sunday, November 17th and Saturday, December 7th. Then on January 25th, we'll do the same 90-minute discussion on Zoom. Like the Death Cafe, these workshops will be limited to 16 people to keep the conversation more personal and comfortable. So if you're interested, I recommend signing up soon. We have some really talented and dedicated members in our mental health team, but we are definitely open to more people joining us. If you're interested in mental health, please find me at the volunteer table during the reception today, and we can talk about the possibilities. And I assure you that when you sign up for the mental health team, you are only signing up for what you feel you have the time and energy to give. Thanks, and I hope some of you will come chat with me about our programs or about joining the team after the program. Next up is Suzanne Perry.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. Before I introduce our speaker, I wanted to tell you a little bit about next month's community gathering, which will take place on November 16th, and we will hear from Tane Danger of the Theater of Public Policy, speaking about how improv skills can bridge divides and enrich your life. Sounds fun. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, J. Patrick Coolican, editor-in-chief of the Minnesota Reformer. The Reformer is an independent, nonprofit organization which says it is dedicated to keeping Minnesotans informed and unearthing stories other outlets can't or won't tell. It's part of State's Newsroom, a national network of nonprofit news operations. And let me just put in a plug for all those great nonprofit journalistic outlets out there, because as you probably all know, traditional newspapers are incredible shrinking papers. If you're interested in politics, government, and business, I urge you to check out Minnesota Reformer. For one thing, they publish great commentaries, including one with the title Christian Nationalism, a Threat to Democracy, which just happened to be written by my colleague, Stephanie Schwinn, and myself. Before joining the Minnesota Reformer, J. Patrick Coolican was a Capitol reporter for the Minneapolis Star Tribune for 5 years, following a Knight-Wallace Fellowship at the University of Michigan and time at Las Vegas Sun, Seattle Times, and a few other stops along the way. When Minnesota Governor Tim Walz was named the Democratic vice presidential candidate, national media started calling on the Minnesota Reformer for insights. Patrick will now be sharing some pre-election insights with us about both Walz and Minnesota's DFL party. Give a warm welcome to Patrick Coolican.
Thanks so much for having me. That's a lovely introduction. Can you hear me? Ready? Yeah, great. I'm sorry I don't have a dazzling slideshow. I have a 3 and a 7-year-old, and which is like living in an unsecure biolab. So we've had quite a week at my house. So you just have to forgive me as I present you some incoherent ramblings instead of a nice slideshow. I thought we would begin with a poem by the late Senator Eugene McCarthy, the Minnesota senator whose campaign in 1968 really changed history by ending the reign of the then very powerful Lyndon Johnson. And I don't know that it's relevant, but because I don't necessarily know I understand the poem, but I think it is relevant to the moment. He says, "The coat has been hung on the peg, the cigar laid on the table edge, the cue chosen and chalked, the balls set for the final break. All cards drawn, all bets called, the dice, warm as blood in the hand, shaken for the last cast. The glove has been thrown to the ground, the last choice of weapons made. A book for one thought, a poem for one line, a line for one word. Broken things are powerful. Things about to break are stronger still. The last shot from the brittle bow is truest." Imagine that's what political rhetoric was like in this country at one time. So I'm going to talk about 3 things today. Very quickly about myself and the Minnesota Reformer, and then I'm going to talk about Minnesota politics and where things stand about a week to go before the election. And then I'm going to talk about this very anxious moment in American history and what we need to do for the future. So I'm not a Minnesotan. I'm originally from Connecticut, large Irish Catholic family. My father and all of my siblings have served in various branches of the U.S. military. I went to Notre Dame, where I read a lot of the famous and infamous Dead White Males. I have a brother who's a federal prosecutor, a sister who's an underpaid math teacher, another brother is a pipe fitter and for a government contractor, and another is a Wall Street banker. So I've been deep into enemy territory, if you will. My father-in-law is an Iranian immigrant, and my mother-in-law is Jewish. So I bring all this around because I think I have a more complex socio-political framework, as we all do, than the neat little boxes that the pundits want to put us in. Just something to keep in mind. My journalism career is a little unconventional. I didn't take any journalism classes. Of course, my critics would say, yeah, no kidding. I didn't do those internships and all that. What I did was I started a website, which this is in the year 2000. This is very early internet. And I traveled around with the 2000 presidential campaign on my own dime with a friend of mine in a truck. And we were using, landlines and putting these silly stories up on the internet. And but I had some published work, self-published, but it was decent enough to get a job at a small newspaper. And then it was long story short, I wound up at the Star Tribune about 10 years ago, and I was a reporter there, a Capitol reporter for 5 years. In 2019, I got approached by these folks from an outfit called States Newsroom, which had this great insight that state legislatures are really where the action is in a lot of American public policy and governance. It's where school funding, social services, transportation, these are the major decisions that are being made. They're not in Washington, they're in state capitals. And at the same time, Capitol bureaus, coverage of state politics and policy was dying around the country because of the collapse of for-profit news, radio stations and newspapers. So you've got this hugely influential set of 50 state governments and nobody's covering it. So the donors and the funders and founders of States Newsroom sought to rectify that. For me, the 2020 election was approaching, and I didn't think I could be a neutral observer of the Trump re-election. So I was looking to make a change. And so they wanted to start Minnesota Reformer. That was the founding editor. And I started in late 2019. And we launched January 14th, 2020, which turned out to be an incredible time to launch a news organization. We are the 12th state in the network. We are now in 39 states. We're the largest state-based media outlet in the country now. In Minnesota, my thinking was different than other states where they've lost so much policy and politics coverage. We actually have decent media ecosystem here. We've got the Star Tribune, the NPR, MinPost, et cetera. But I wanted to do, so I didn't feel like we should just be going to press conferences and legislative hearings and so forth. We needed to find stories that other people were not telling. And I wanted to do more work that was more confrontational and more suited to this current moment. This worked perfectly for me because I like to say I got into journalism because I really enjoy asking powerful people really rude questions. So short history, we're coming up on 5 years. Here's some of the stories we've done. We wrote about the broken discipline system of the Minneapolis Police Department, which allowed the likes of Derek Chauvin to do terrible damage to the city, even though all the red flags were there. Wage theft allegations at a development controlled by the Minnesota Vikings, the extent of 3M's dumping of chemicals in the East Metro and what the company knew about it all along, the Mayo Clinic's effort to muscle senior lawmakers and Walz administration to kill legislation it didn't want, and all manner of malfeasance on the part of the politicians. One of my go-to lines to my staff is as the state fair begins to happen every year is, why don't we have a good hit piece on the state fair? And the reason I say that is because I just feel like we ought to take the most powerful and beloved institutions and scrutinize them. And that's our job. Here's the fascinating media environment we're in that I heard a constitutional lawyer make about a decade ago. It used to be we all had a pretty good measure of privacy, but there were extraordinary high barriers to entry to becoming a publisher. Now, everybody can be a publisher, and there's essentially very little privacy, especially if you live your life online at all, which most of us do. Now, that was 10 years ago. Now you have to add to that everyone has access to AI doctored images and words. So everyone's a publisher, everyone has access to AI doctoring of images and words, and no privacy. That's a challenging environment, and none of us were prepared for it. So consider the implications of that and how it's affecting our political environment. I think it is in a great way. So the reformers part of that environment, and we're not pretending to be neutral on the question of whether or not Donald Trump is a threat to the country. So how do we become credible? We do it by just doing old school journalism ethics. We report in good faith. We seek to be rigorous, intellectually honest, and that has helped us win the respect of readers of all stripes, I believe. In fact, I know that because I have plenty of Republicans I talk to. So visit our website, sign up for our free newsletter. Normally I would say give us money, but today you should give to Humanist MN. Okay, Minnesota. Let's talk about the topic of the speech was why is the Democratic Party here so dominant at the moment? And so let's talk about and let me say I'm reasonably sure after Tuesday Democrats will continue to control state government for the next 2 years. So one factor is this legacy. Populism, progressivism, Hubert Humphrey's Civil Rights Address at the 1948 Democratic Convention, Gene McCarthy, Walter Mondale, Paul Wellstone. That's an important legacy that I think lives on. As Tennyson wrote in Ulysses, I am a part of all that I've met. So, I mean, I know people in DFL politics, dozens of people who are still filled with those warm embers of Paul Wellstone's life and legacy. They knew him, they worked for him, and they lived to complete his legacy. And I think Tim Walz is in that tradition. So I think that's important. It's continues to be important in rural Minnesota, where we do have this sharp rural urban divide. But I think that there are still remnants of rural progressivism that remain important to the Democratic farmer labor here. I'll give you an example. Joe Biden's margin of victory in 2020 was about 230,000 votes. That's roughly the number of votes he got in rural counties. So that's still an important tradition, and it's still there. Now, it has certainly eroded. And in fact, I arrived a few months before it happened in the 2014 election when Republicans picked up, I think, 10 seats in rural Minnesota, and then they consolidated those gains in 2016 and ever since. But Democrats in Minnesota have this, we're actually, ironically enough, lucky that Donald Trump came along because he's turned off college degree voters and suburban voters. And this has cost Republicans a ton of seats, especially in the suburbs, in the West Metro especially. The 3rd Congressional District is now effectively blue in perpetuity. And I think it's also true of the 2nd Congressional District in the East Metro. Angie Craig, the DFL congresswoman, has won close races there. But I think that there's she's going to open up some breathing room. And I think that's in place in perpetuity as well. Now, not only has Trump turned off those college-educated voters in the suburbs, but I think that's a monolithic view of the suburbs. The suburbs are rapidly diversifying. They're becoming a home to many immigrant Minnesotans and the children of immigrants. And of course, we know about Trump's rhetoric about our Somali and Latino neighbors. So those are two important factors. So now we've got the legacy. Trump is the gift that gives to Minnesota Democrats. We have higher union density in Minnesota than in our neighboring upper Midwest states. Unions provide money and foot soldiers for campaigns, and then it's a virtuous cycle because allied lawmakers pass pro-worker legislation at the Capitol. And of course, that's most true of a very powerful and effective teachers union. We also have an interesting phenomenon here. I think unlike in other upper Midwest states, we have an active, what I call a religious left. So there's, you might be familiar with there's a progressive ecumenical group called Isaiah that has a political arm called Faith in Minnesota. And as of the last campaign finance report, they had raised more than $800,000. That's a huge sum for a religious organization. That same group, or Isaiah, actually sent, they tell me, 5,000 individual volunteers appeared at the Capitol representing Isaiah during the 2023 legislative session. That's an incredible grassroots movement. And you might not think that legislators would be influenced by a crowd, but they can be. Another reason for Democratic dominance, we may not think of ourselves as an urban state, but the reality is that the majority of voters in Minnesota, unlike the Dakotas, Iowa, and Wisconsin, are in the Twin Cities metro. And so with Democrats now winning overwhelmingly in the cities and the suburbs, that turns into legislative majorities and statewide victories. But I have a secret key to Minnesota politics and why Democrats are so successful here. It's sophisticated and nuanced and difficult to understand, so I ask you to listen closely. There are more Democrats here than Republicans. It's a fact that my Republican friends can't seem to understand, and because they can't, because they are not grappling with that, they're putting up the wrong candidates, and they continue to lose. They have not won a statewide race here since 2006. That was Tim Pawlenty's re-election, and it was a squeaker. And so they're going to have to figure it out, basically. There's also a strong tradition here of really effective fundraising, political operatives, and field operations here on the part of Democrats, as well as research. The state Democratic Party is one of the few in the country that has a full-time staff that continue to work even when there's not, even in the off years. They're able to do that because they're an excellent fundraising operation, and then they keep those people working on the ground, and it's a huge advantage. Republicans have not been able to match that in 15 years. There are, nothing is inevitable though, and I think there are warning signs for Democrats on the horizon, and that's due to governing challenges. I mean, if you're going to keep winning elections, you got to govern well, and so they're going to have to continue to deliver a good quality of life to a majority of Minnesotans. And we've seen in recent years a spike in government fraud, rising property taxes. Those of us with young children are paying what amounts to a second mortgage, and childcare costs. And so I think it's important that Democratic elected officials focus on deliverables what are the policies that are going to make life better for the average Minnesotan? And then they're going to have to implement those policies, because you can have great ideas all you want, but you've got to execute. So I think that Minnesota will stay blue a week from Tuesday. I think, especially with Governor Tim Walz on the ticket and Amy Klobuchar, it's probably going to be a 5 to 10 point victory on the part of Kamala Harris. Klobuchar will win bigger, and Democrats will pick up a couple seats in the House. And there's one Senate election. I think they're going to win that. That's in the West Metro. That's a classic district that traditionally would have been Republican, but Trump having really transformed American politics, it's now, I think, safely Democratic. So I do think they're going to continue to hold the trifecta. And there's really no more important time for Minnesota to stand apart from the country. So now I want to talk about where we are here in the United States. Let me read to you some quotes. Republicans: calling Trump dangerous or offensive only excites his fans. Concentrate on how he's dishonest and authoritarian instead. Has any politician since Hitler had as many actual Nazi followers as Donald Trump? If this were Germany in the 1930s, Trump fans would seriously be voting for Hitler. Saying the U.S. military won't refuse me if he demands unconstitutional acts is legit fascist. Trump is a proto-fascist strongman. Trump is a wildly unprincipled authoritarian. Implying elections are rigged, especially before they've taken place, is actually dangerous to democracy. If Trump isn't nominated, he will hold riots. This is how fascist dictatorships happen, folks. Now, I'd ask you all, what do speakers of these statements all have in common? And the answer is they're all Republicans. And all of them are now currently supporting Donald Trump. So, now, of course, they said these things in 2016, 2021, shortly after January 6th. The point is, he's taken over the party, and he's kind of, there's nothing left. So, it's pretty scary when some of his biggest supporters say he's a fascist and authoritarian. Now, as far as the national election, I think it's probably a coin flip. I think Harris may win, but I also think that we ought to think deeply about the implications of this campaign in particular, even if she does win. And I want to read to you a bit from a guy who's a former stalwart of the neoconservative right, named Jonathan Last, who's become an apostate and is the editor of an anti-Trump publication called The Bulwark. He says, there aren't any excuses left. Something like 47% of American voters have seen Trump, they understood what he was, and they wanted it. Win or lose, that's the fundamental reality this race has laid bare. The next era in American politics will be defined by how we grapple with the implications of this reality for civic life and self-governance. The only open question is whether or not we will be undertaking that effort from the position of a temporarily secure democratic order. So I think that even amid the celebrations of a Harris victory over the forces of over the Red Hats, we have to think deeply about where we are and where we need to go. I was lucky enough to have been in this journalism fellowship. It was a pretty good scam. They paid me to not work for a year and hang out at the University of Michigan. And part of it was we traveled as a group and would talk to political and economic and cultural leaders. We went to South America as well as Turkey. And what was eye-opening for me, which in retrospect, I suppose is kind of naive and ignorant, was that there's not really a dividing line between democracy and authoritarianism. It's a spectrum. And so you go to Turkey and, I mean, they had democratic elections, but I don't think anybody would say that that Erdogan is upholding liberal values, small l. And the same was certainly true of Argentina and Brazil. And so I think with this election in particular, I mean, after having survived one Trump term, I think what it's told us is that we're really lacking in democratic habits of mind. I don't think anybody would say that after this election, whether or not Trump wins or loses, that we have a healthy civic life in this country. So, I mean, let's just consider the prospect of Trump winning. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think like we haven't necessarily thought through the implications. And I thought that the move by the Washington Post yesterday to forego a presidential endorsement was very telling, not because anybody really pays attention to newspaper endorsements anymore, but really it was a signal that the billionaire class, Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, he was, I think, sending a signal to Trump that he would be friendly. And for one of the most important news outlets in the country, the Washington Post, to have engaged in that kind of anticipatory surrender, to me, I think was very telling. And sent a very bad signal to other business leaders. Because I think that one of the first things Trump will do is he will use the power of the state to go after his enemies in media, first and foremost. But generally, I think for a lot of us, life isn't likely to change much. And that's one of the secret weapons of any authoritarian state. But I also want us to consider the implications of his plan to deport millions of our undocumented neighbors. And I was reading something by Timothy Snyder, who's a scholar of authoritarianism, and he, for some reason, this really grabbed me when he talks about the logistical challenges of such a massive deportation of people. He says, such an enormous deportation will require an army of informers. People who denounce their neighbors or coworkers will be presented as positive examples. Denunciation then becomes a culture. If you're a Latino, expect to be denounced at some point and expect special attention from a government that will demand your help to find people who are not documented. This is especially true if you're a local civic or business leader. You will be expected to collaborate in the deportation effort. If you do, you will be harming others. If you do not, you risk being seen as disloyal yourself. So now the question is Trump and the people around him, are they organized enough? They seem, on the face of it, so incompetent to carry out this kind of project. But I think we need to be prepared for it. And we need to have a plan in place to protect our neighbors. And that's why federalism, in our case, Minnesota state government, is going to be so important as we protect Minnesotans from this kind of federal effort. And more broadly, I think about there's kind of a famous memo that the late Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell, before he was a Supreme Court Justice, he was a corporate lawyer, and he wrote this memo that he sent to his friend at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in 1971, and he sort of laid out. It was titled "Attack on American Free Enterprise System," and he outlined ways in which business should defend and counterattack against a broad attack, as they say, on American free enterprise system. And so it's a strategy memo. It says we gotta lays out what we gotta do. And no, I'm not gonna. The influence of the memo has probably been wildly overstated, but the reality is that from the time he writes that memo in 1971 until, let's say, 2008, you had massive tax cuts on American corporations and wealthiest individuals and investors. You had deregulation of a bunch of industries, especially Wall Street. You had a whole judiciary assault on people's right to seek to have their rights upheld in the courts, and it was a long and patient and well-funded and well-organized project, and it was wildly successful. And I think it's kind of a thing where you overestimate your opponent's competency and skills. And so Democrats think that Republicans are masterminds and vice versa. But I think it's an interesting model. How do we formulate a 10-year, 25-year, 50-year plan to restore liberal, small l values and those democratic habits of mind that I mentioned earlier? I mean, some of this is like, you never thought we'd be having to argue about this stuff, but accepting election results and the peaceful transfer of power and all that stuff. How do we get so that instead of 47% of the population rejecting those simple foundational values, I mean, how do we drive that down into nothing? So that's, I think, what we need. And I think the sooner that we get started on it, the better. I don't know who's going to do it. I don't have time. But I hope that that's something that we should be thinking about now, because, like I said, win or lose, this should be a wake-up call to those of us who do not want to live in an authoritarian country. And we can't just plan for the next election or the next presidential election. It's got to be a decades-long strategy that is carried out with single-minded focus. So, thanks so much again for having me, and I'm happy to take questions.
Hi. If you have questions, you can line up over here. Make sure that they are succinct so everyone gets a chance. Make sure it's a question and not a statement. But yes, you're welcome to line up over here and ask away.
By the way, I put a bunch of my business cards on the table in the back, so feel free to grab one.
Somehow that request to do questions rather than statements never works here in this group. So what specific ideas do you have for how we can reach those 47% people? Because I just can't understand why these poor people from rural areas are supporting that billionaire who lies about everything. So how do we reach them?
Yeah, maybe that's above my pay grade, but I mean, I would certainly take ideas, but I think a reinvigorated civics education. But the problem is that the education system has been politicized, and you have these right-wing candidates who've taken over school boards, and so what kind of civics education would they be imparting? I like the idea of a mandatory service requirement for young people. I think that Americans don't know each other very well, except through the lens of social media and the absolute worst kinds of impressions that they get. They're told to believe certain things about each other, and if you had a service requirement, I mean, maybe it's something that we could. I mean, the states are the laboratories of democracy. We could do it here in Minnesota, so that a kid from South Minneapolis could spend time with a kid from Jordan, Minnesota, and they might get to know each other and understand each other a little bit. So those are just some ideas. I think support for nonprofit media, of course that's self-serving, but yeah, it's something we got to think about and start working on.
Just a quick question. Why do you think the election is a coin flip? What is that based on? Made my heart sink.
Yeah. Well, it's just, the polling industry is pretty broken, but I mean, I think that when you aggregate them all, and they're all within a couple points in the 7 states that matter, so that's just the reality. I mean, he came close to winning in 2020, and so the polls indicate it's close. The early voting indicates it's close. So all indications are that it's going to be a close election. I'd be surprised if it were decided on election night.
So your last point related the need to have a 10, 20, 50-year plan. I totally agree with that. My question is that what organizations do you see out there who are thinking the same way and would be allies in creating a plan like that?
Well, I think your own organization, I would certainly want to be at the center of that. But the problem is that in the liberal philanthropic space, you have these, you have big philanthropists whose interests often will go all over the place. And so there's all this climate money, and then George Floyd is murdered, and there's all this equity DEI money, and there isn't really the discipline required. And that's what we need. Whereas I think on the right, when they started all this in the 70s, it was a far more disciplined, systematic effort. And whereas on the left, it seems to be much more scattershot and they can't really agree on a common set of values. And it also tends to be like more short-term thinking. So some of it is related to the problems, I think, in the philanthropic space.
So there's no equivalent of the Heritage Foundation in the offering.
Right, that's part of the, yeah, that's kind of, yeah, you summed that up, yeah. I mean, the Center for American Progress, I think is a good outfit, but we need something bigger than that.
So there have been some rumblings from some traditional Republicans. I'm thinking of more like Liz Cheney, maybe Mitt Romney. Mitch McConnell's made some comments that he's not really happy with Trump. Do you think there's any opportunity for more traditional or reasonable Republicans to form a viable third party, or do you think they're just not willing to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a small group of people. They're influential, and they have a good megaphone. But I think that the folks who would have been in that party, like let's call them like 3rd District, West Metro Republicans, they simply left the party. So, and I think that they're solidly Democratic now. So, unfortunately, I don't think that that there's enough people to form a third party. It's a small but influential group of apostates, and I think we've seen already that they really have no influence on the Republican Party, because I mean he got nominated again easily. So if they were to lose, and lose convincingly, commandingly, then I suspect there would be some introspection amongst Republicans who would say, enough is enough. I mean, we keep losing with this guy. And that might force some change, but we'll see. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned the role of the Isaiah group and their lobbying arm, Faith in America.
Mm-hmm.
You said 500,000 visits to the Capitol. Did I get that
5,000.
right? 5,000. Okay. We think a lot about the role of religion in government in this organization, and I'm wondering if part of the reason that we stay blue is we don't have a strong right-wing religious movement. We don't have a lot of evangelicals or fundamentalist Christians. But I'm wondering if you see any spark in that direction, have you run across any movement for the religious right to get more involved in politics here? I know there was some candidate in rural Minnesota who declared he was a Christian nationalist. I don't think he won, but I don't know if he's a harbinger.
I mean, there's a powerful religious right in the Republican Party. Yeah.
But in Minnesota?
Yeah. I mean, especially in rural Minnesota. But it's just not, there's not enough for them to win, have a governing majority, unlike many other states, including our neighbor states. So yeah, that's an interesting situation where our religious left seems to be more influential than our religious right. I prefer none of it, but that's, I prefer one over the other.
Okay, I certainly agree with your point that our country is suffering from a serious lack of civic culture, concern of support for democratic values. I mean, when Trump said in the 2016 debate that he'd only accept the results of the election if he won, that should have been the end of his political career. That said, I think there's good grounds for believing that many of Trump's supporters do so out of feelings of dissatisfaction with the country, with where it's going, and with kind of the left as they perceive it. And I happen to think that some of those concerns are legitimate. So my question to you is, what could the left and Democrats do to make their views and their candidates more acceptable to mainstream America?
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of of two minds of this. I mean, on the one hand, you know, all of this talk about how America, basically, a lot of his campaign is that America sucks and it's all terrible. And I just don't, I mean, it would be an historic first, it seems to me, if we were to choose authoritarianism in a time of peace, relative peace and prosperity. It's so strange to me. And that comes across, I know, as callous, I think, to people who are actually struggling. They have real economic troubles and so forth. So part of this is just, I don't really understand the level of animosity that people feel seems wildly out of balance with the actual situation. On the other hand, it seems like the problem that we've developed in the last few decades is a lot of people, especially men, young men, are struggling to find meaning in their lives, and so they're relying on you know, the worst kinds of things that the internet has to offer, and drugs and alcohol and everything else, and so there's, you know, we have that tension between liberty and virtue, I think, since the country's founding, and somehow we have to somehow it seems like the loss of organized religion has not been replaced, and as well as cultural and civic groups has declined, and so it seems like some people are they're adrift, and so they find themselves running into the arms of Donald Trump. So is the American situation more existential than just a policy program? I mean, what are we supposed to do if people feel like their life is meaningless? I mean, I don't know. On the other hand, to be more pragmatic to what you're saying, like, what can Democrats do to appeal to people? And I think there's definitely a sense in which people feel like they're talked down to, and there's a certain condescension in some corners of the Democratic Party and liberal commentariat, and that can certainly be improved with you know, just stop doing that. Stop talking to people like they're stupid or helpless. So I don't know if that helps.
Thank you for speaking. It's been very interesting. I have a confusion, which is a question, but then as I was waiting, some other issue came up for me that's very much intersected, I think. I'm Jewish, and I heard you say something in the beginning, toward the end of your talk, about how you thought, this is what I think I heard, that society and life was not going to change all that much if Trump gets in. I thought I heard that, something like that. But then you talked about the Washington Post and Jeff Bezos and the immigrants situation, and there's probably a lot of other situations and other business owners. That to me shows like life is going to change, already has started to change in preparation for what might be. And I'm just curious also, I don't know anything about your background, but I'm just wondering how much you've studied about the Holocaust and the beginnings of Nazism in the early 30s or maybe before that, and how people sort of didn't get what was really happening, and then it's too late, the ball's already rolling down the hill, which is kind of what I'm feeling about if Trump gets elected. So much is going to change. So I would like a little more understanding about how, if I heard you right, that you thought life wasn't going to change all that much, because to me it seems like it really will, and just somehow a connection with the rise of Nazism.
Yeah.
And the outing of Jewish people, and I mean, it just seems like such a straight line parallel to me. It's very, very terrifying to me personally, and a lot of other Jewish people. But I just like to hear a
understandable.
little bit more about that.
Yeah, what I meant was that, I mean, for targeted minorities, for people who are targeted, life would change a lot. But for many Americans, it wouldn't. And that's sort of the power of it, is that people are, well, they told me that this guy's a fascist, but like my life is, more or less unchanged. And then that creates the apathy or the banality of evil, to use a phrase from that era, that allows the authoritarian encroachment to continue.
So I'm not just
So it sounds like a contradiction, but it's actually, I think they work hand in hand.
I'm not just talking specifically about certain minority groups. I didn't mean it to be that way, but because you're looking at the ultra wealthy and how they can manipulate things, because they know that Trump is probably somewhat manipulative or manipulatable as well. And if media and the journalism people and the wealthy people can try to influence a lot of things, and it's not just the minority people, it's the strong people here in America too who can start manipulating things with Trump. And if journalism and media changes and there's more structure around that and more prohibitions, I just feel like, the ball has already started rolling, because even the wealthy, not just the poor. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary. I don't mean to minimize that, but I just mean that Disney World will still be open and operating, and people will still be going to school and restaurants and stuff. And
that's just, I feel like I'm sort of getting in an argument here, and I don't mean to, but that's just special things that are going on in life. But the ultimate values that we hold, freedom of this and freedom of that and choice, and that's just going to be eliminated. I mean, if Jeff Bezos can be manipulated, and he's now not wanting to talk, more freely, and other businesses, like you said, will maybe follow suit because they're taking the leadership of what he's doing. So I don't know how it will stay the same.
But paradoxically, but he can be controlled much easier than I can be, because he has huge contracts with the United States government, and that's what he's afraid of. Whereas I'm independent, and so like we'll keep publishing. There's no question about that. So I don't mean to minimize the threat. I mean, that's what I'm talking about here. Is it's a grave threat. But part of that threat is that a lot of people are going to be apathetic about it. And so we need to...
Until it's too late, like what happened.
Exactly. And so we need to be ready and sort of have a plan ahead of time.
I think the plan needed to be started 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because like I said, I feel like the ball is already rolling.
Right. I mean, everybody says, let's say, this is the most important election of your lifetime. It's like, no, the 2016 election was. That was the election.
Well, I knew that was a problem right there. I just said, everybody's not believing this, but I'm sorry, but I think he's going to win, and this is really bad.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Two questions or two comments that I'll try to state as questions, I guess, at some point. But one is, first, I'm currently the new outreach officer for the DFL Environmental Caucus. So I've been tasked with thinking about this kind of stuff. How have Democrats isolated and such? And we won't be able to do much in this election, but as we move on, I think that Democrats have isolated themselves. We have. We've turned away young men, young non-college men, as Hillary Clinton so kindly put it, the deplorables, the ones who don't go to the colleges that we go to and stuff, most of us. We've largely ignored, I think, the outstate in Minnesota, the outstate region, the small cities. There are 94 cities other than outside the Twin Cities region with more than 5,000 people. So outreach doesn't mean rural. It certainly doesn't mean farmers, a very small percentage of our farmers. And we don't talk to them about their ideas, whether it's environment or anything else. They have a lot of problems. I don't hear a lot of those being addressed by the core Democrats or platforms and such.
I will say that the legislature sends a lot of money.
There is more going out than there is coming in.
And they,
That's true.
and they don't get any credit for that.
Well, maybe that's the.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they're not doing a good enough job.
The messaging out. The other is, I've been thinking about this for years, but we have a fundamental lack of trust in government. I was looking at a graph a week ago or so. Trust in government, just to ask as a single question, not an articulated question, by the Pew Foundation, was 72% during the Eisenhower administration. I wasn't not quite that old, but if we start with Nixon or so, we started out really trusting government quite a lot, especially in the post-war period. And that's down to now well under 30%. It crashed, started crashing during the
Vietnam and
contract. Yeah. Well, that and the Contract on America later. Yeah, Vietnam, then Contract on America, then Obama, and then it stayed low, and it hit lows around 20% for Biden and 25% with Biden and Trump. We've done something very, very, very wrong here to get that. I mean, how do you run a government with 25% trust? And I'm wondering, do you have ideas on how we improve that trust so we actually get somewhere? It's sort of if we think of the mechanism by which Republicans tore down a lot of our government deliberately, the Newt Gingrich project, the War on America sort of thing. But going the opposite direction, how do we rebuild that trust so we can even address the problems? We can't address the problems until we start to build trust. And that probably has to be one of these 10-year projects. It's nothing that's going to happen with a few tweets.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and that's trust of civic institutions broadly. Trust in the media is next to zero. Some of this is due to a very concerted, well-funded effort to destroy that trust. They took aim at government, government experts, the idea of independent expertise, the media, the universities. They set up their own parallel structure. It was all very deliberate. But at the same time, Vietnam and Watergate eroded trust in government, as it should have. But yeah, I don't understand why the Democrats in particular, but those who believe that government can be a force for flourishing, they don't really point out enough all of the things that government does that people don't even realize. I mean, consider how safe it is to fly in a commercial airplane. I mean, it's a miracle. You go to the airport, you get on a plane, and you fly 3,000 miles in 5 hours, and you never have any doubt that you're going to land safely. That's entirely the federal government that did that. And they just don't do a very good job of, and to a certain extent, we don't really want government to be propagandizing either. But if you consider what the United States federal government has done in the last century, I mean, there's defeated the fascists, built the interstate highway system, ameliorated elderly poverty and Medicare. People were going bankrupt because their health care bills. We desegregated to some extent, not enough. The South in particular, we improved air quality. We improved the safety of automobiles and airplanes. It's pretty remarkable record of achievement, but people don't, they don't realize it, or they ignore it, or in some cases they willfully attack it so that they can get their agenda of deregulation through. So yeah, I mean, that's a knotty problem, but loss of civic trust is definitely driving the Trump phenomenon. Thank you.
Well, before my question, I'll add my 2 cents. It's Reagan's fault.
What's that?
It's Reagan's fault.
Reagan's fault, yeah.
He said government was the problem.
Right,
I mean, yes,
yeah.
there was erosion of trust before that with Watergate and Vietnam, et cetera, but he got into office and said government is the problem.
Right.
In terms of addressing human needs and flourishing for us. But anyway, that was very editorial. So you're a journalist, and you remarked on this at the opening of your remarks, is that everyone can be a publisher now. Everybody can post, everyone, whatever. What do we do about that? Because there is no standard of fact or truth that Fox can call themselves news, a news outlet. And so when I was young and growing up, I mean, maybe it was still very mainstream, but you had Walter Cronkite, and everyone believed mostly, not that you would have to believe 100%, and we need more diverse voices. But now everybody is out there, and there is no standard. And so as a fellow journalist, you've started your own project, or with others. How do we address this problem of having the same facts or having the same fundamental idea of what is happening?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, the horse is out of the barn.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what do we do?
Yeah. I mean, there is bipartisan consensus on regulating the big tech companies. And so, if you could create strong regulations that would drive down their profits, then they would become broadly less influential. But certainly every time you have a new technology in media, I mean, from the printing press to the pamphlet to television, radio, you have this problem. Although with TV licenses, there was a strong strong regulatory framework, and you could lose your TV license because it was people understood how powerful it was and how important it was that it be regulated. And we had no such thing, obviously, with the internet. I mean, with the big tech companies, they've been given carte blanche, and they're completely protected by federal law from facing any libel or you know, any people, you can do anything on one of those platforms, and the platform is absolved because, you know, they're considered a instead of being considered a newspaper, they're more like a bookstore, and so they're free of litigation, and so, you know, and now the owner of one of those companies is on the verge of being Trump's essentially like a shadow president. That's Elon Musk, and I don't know if you spend any time on Twitter, or X as we call it now, I guess. I mean, it's just a complete garbage dump of Nazis and white supremacists, and I mean, it's just horrible, and you know, and so much disinformation. Fueled by foreign governments. Yeah, it's a serious problem. So I don't know that I've given you any. But certainly regulation.
It's probably
the first
not
step.
Yeah. So yeah, can we say this can be this is a news outlet, whatever it is, whether it's TV, radio, or the internet. This is a news outlet, and everything else is something else. Or like in England, I don't know if it, you know, the BBC, I don't know that it is what it was once, but I mean, I don't know.
But we also have the First Amendment, and you know, I think that's worth defending. Yeah, there's no ethic of responsibility attached to it, unfortunately, right now.
Yeah, I have a lot of commentary on that. No more questions?
All right, thank you for the great questions, and thank you so much for the presentation today. If you can all join us in the lobby for the reception, we'd love to have you stick around and socialize. And once again, make sure to pick up some information about our fundraiser for a part-time staff position, and let us know if you have any questions about that. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.